Tropical Cyclone Narelle crossed the far north Queensland coast this morning, and it is not finished. At around 7 in the morning, local time, on March 20th, 2026, one of the most powerful tropical cyclones to threaten Cape York Peninsula in more than a century made landfall near the remote community of Coen, a town of 320 people with no cyclone shelter, producing wind gusts of more than 250 kilometers per hour. Widespread power outages cut across the Cape York Peninsula. Emergency alerts ordered residents in Lockhart River, Coen, and Port Stewart to take immediate shelter. Rio Tinto shut its Amrun and Andoom bauxite mines, two operations that together supply 30 million tons of aluminium ore annually. Rain of more than 500 millimeters is forecast around Cooktown within 48 hours. And Narelle is not done. It is now tracking west as a Category 3 system across Cape York, heading for the Gulf of Carpentaria, where warm water will feed it again. The Northern Territory is bracing for a Category 4 landfall by Saturday night. But here's the detail that tells the real story. Narelle had been a Category 5 system for less than 24 hours before it hit the coast. At peak intensity on the morning of Thursday, March 19th, 2026, it was packing sustained winds of 205 kilometers per hour near its center, and gusts to 285 kilometers per hour. Winds strong enough, Queensland Disaster Coordinator Assistant Commissioner Chris Stream told reporters, to blow apart sheds, launch caravans down roadways, and turn airborne debris into fatal projectiles traveling at more than 100 kilometers per hour. The system was downgraded from Category 5 to Category 4 in the final hours before crossing the coast. The headlines called it a weakening. What crossed the Queensland coast this morning was still a system capable of stripping roofs from buildings, snapping trees at their trunks, and producing a storm tide that the Bureau of Meteorology warned could push ocean water well above normal high tide levels into Princess Charlotte Bay. To understand how Narelle arrived at this moment, you have to watch what the Coral Sea has been doing. Tropical cyclones typically need sea surface temperatures of at least 26.5 degrees Celsius to form and intensify. The Northwest Coral Sea, where Narelle developed, recorded a sea surface temperature of 29.5 degrees Celsius this week, an all-time record for February and March. That is 0.5 to 1.0 degrees above the already elevated recent average. Narelle formed from a tropical disturbance in the Coral Sea and intensified rapidly, reaching Category 5 status within a compressed time frame. Steve Turton, adjunct professor of environmental geography at CQ University, Australia, noted that Narelle bore a direct structural resemblance to severe tropical cyclone Larry, which struck Innisfail as a Category 4 system exactly 20 years ago. Larry devastated Innisfail and surrounding towns. Narelle arrived as the same category, with a hotter ocean underneath it. And then it got worse. The warning zone extended from Lockhart River in the north all the way south to Cape Tribulation, encompassing some of the most isolated communities on the Australian continent. Police went door to door across multiple communities. Vulnerable residents were evacuated. Tourists were flown out on the last available flights. Schools were closed. More than 100 emergency services personnel were deployed north. And then, on Thursday evening, the Bureau of Meteorology confirmed that tides in Princess Charlotte Bay were likely to rise dangerously above normal high tide levels as the cyclone's center crossed the coast. A storm tide warning was issued for coastal residents across the East Cape York area. communities accessible, in many cases, only by plane or barge. Wayne Butcher, mayor of Lockhart River, had been watching the storm's approach for 2 days. He told the AAP wire service early on Friday morning that conditions had deteriorated overnight and that his community was locked down and waiting. He described the sound of the wind whistling through the trees. He said everyone was inside. He said he believed the cyclone was crossing the coast right then, closer to Cohen, but that things were really bad at Lockhart River too. In Cohen, local business owner Sarah Watkins sheltered inside solid brick buildings alongside other residents as the storm raged around them. 250 of the town's 320 people had chosen to stay. Cohen has no dedicated cyclone shelter. Those 250 people rode out a Category 4 cyclone in whatever structures they judged to be the most solid. Sarah Watkins told AAP, "The winds were howling and beating against panels. Then, it is not as bad as I expected. Then, that does not mean it cannot get worse. Here is what the science reveals, and it is stranger than anything a headline can carry. Narelle is what meteorologists describe as a compact system, a small but intense core structure producing extreme winds within a concentrated radius. Cyclone Tracy, which destroyed Darwin on Christmas Day, 1974, was the same classification. Tracy's gales extended only 40 to 50 kilometers from the eye. Its official death toll was 66 people. Between 70 and 90% of Darwin's buildings were damaged. Between 60 and 80% of its houses were completely destroyed. 94% of all housing in the city was rendered uninhabitable overnight. Narelle, like Tracy, is compact. Like Tracy, its danger is not its size, it is its core. Senior Bureau of Meteorology meteorologist Sarah Scully told reporters on Friday morning that satellite data was confirming widespread winds near the center well in excess of 200 kilometers per hour, with the potential to cause significant structural damage, significant loss of roofs, and major property destruction across the Cape York region. Here is the problem that is not making headlines. 60% of Queensland's local government areas have required disaster recovery funding at some point since December 2025 alone. Parts of northwest Queensland recorded close to their entire annual average rainfall in a single week in late December. A tropical low in January triggered evacuations along the Gilbert River and in the town of Innesley. The local government areas now in Narelle's path, Cook, Carpentaria, Barcoo, are already among the most disaster impacted in the state. The Cape York region was already wet, already flooded, already stretched, and into that already saturated landscape, Narelle is now dumping more than 500 millimeters of rain in 48 hours. The Northern Territory faces the same compounding problem on a larger scale. Narelle is expected to make its second landfall near the community of Groot Island off the eastern NT coast, then intensify again before striking the top end as a Category 4 system on Saturday. The Catherine River, which only weeks ago suffered its worst flooding in almost 30 years, is already under a major flood warning. Kupa Tiao, chief executive of the Anindaliaqua Land Council on Groot Island, said on Friday that resources have been directed into preparation, but that a sense of uncertainty remained across the community. Uncertainty is the word that covers everything Narelle has left in its wake, and everything it has not yet reached. If Narelle formed and peaked in Coral Sea waters at an all-time record temperature of 29.5 degrees, and if 60% of Queensland's councils are already on disaster recovery funding before this system has finished crossing the continent, and if the Northern Territory's most flood-vulnerable river system is about to absorb a second major weather event within weeks, what does the damage bill for this single cyclone look like when it finally stops? If a compact Category 4 system can shut two major mining operations supplying 30 million tons of bauxite annually, cut power across the Cape York Peninsula, and force 250 people to shelter in a town with no cyclone shelter, what did the Category 5 it nearly was look like for any community that stood directly in the eye? And if Queensland is the state that absorbs this again and again, season after season, while its council areas drain disaster recovery funds and its river systems inch closer to their limits each wet season, at what point does each new cyclone stop being an event and start being proof of a pattern that no forecast model can outrun? Narelle crossed the coast at 7 in the morning, local time, on March 20th, 2026. It is still moving, and the Gulf of Carpentaria is 29 degrees at the surface and waiting.